did think about just ending the service after the first reading, since it says that she had nothing else to say. But I wasn't sure you might have appreciated it. In the fall of 2011, I drove across the United States to spent a few months of a sabbatical on Cape Cod in a wonderful old house owned by my younger sister and her husband. Life is rough, but somebody's got to do it. In mid-December, I began my return home, and it was probably because I was spending so much time in restaurants and gas stations and hotels that I became more aware than usual of the overwhelming presence of Christmas everywhere I went. Christmas trees were in lobbies of all the hotels. Wreaths and other greenery adorned the restaurants, and Christmas carols were nonstop everywhere, even as I pumped gas into my car at gas stations. And all of a sudden, one day, as I sat in some restaurant somewhere in the southern United States, listening to yet another string of mindless Christmas songs, I thought to myself, I wonder how I'd feel if I were Jewish or a Muslim or a Hindu. Now, the commercialism of Christmas in the American culture has roiled me for most of my adult life, and it still does. But that year, on my drive across our country, I became more aware and uncomfortable with the religious exclusivity of our American culture, especially during December. It's not that I hadn't noticed it before, this exclusivity, this idea that some religions think they have the only one truth. There are, objections from conservative Christians to the so-called war on Christmas have been going on for a very long time. And then there have been numerous battles with fundamentalist Christians over displaying crosses or the Ten Commandments on government property, allowing prayer in public schools, excluding the teaching of evolution in schools, or at least wanting to include creationism as an equally valid concept, things like that. It has been going on for as long as I can remember. But that particular Christmas is when I, who was raised as an Episcopalian and in many ways am still tied to that tradition, gained a heightened sensitivity to what it might feel like to be a non-Christian in America. It was a humbling experience. But as often happens, once I returned home and immersed myself in the Christmas festivities of my family, I forgot all about the experiences of the previous few weeks. Life went on as usual. And then the following year at Christmas, the issue came to a head not far from home, down in Santa Monica. You may have heard about it at the time. Apparently, ever since the 1950s, the city of Santa Monica had allowed a series of 14 nativity scenes to be displayed in a park during the month of December. And then one year, a man described in the newspaper as a local atheist, Damon Fixx, objected to the scenes because the park is public land, paid for by the residents of Santa Monica. Mr. Fixx began protesting by erecting signs with more humanist messages, such as a quote by Thomas Jefferson, "Religions are all alike, founded upon fables and mythologies." But Mr. Fixx went further than that. He and quote-unquote other atheists applied for dozens of spaces in the park to set up more inclusive displays. And then, I guess because too much space was being filled up in the park with all these displays, the Santa Monica City Council held a lottery for spaces, and the atheists won the majority of them. This left only a few spaces for the people in charge of the nativity scenes, which only tells me that God not only is in favor of religious inclusivity, but also loves a good practical joke. Unfortunately, some folks didn't understand the humor or the American values of religious freedom and began vandalizing the atheists' displays. So finally, the city council voted unanimously to ban all unattended private displays from city parks, essentially ending both the nativity scenes and the non-nativity ones, which is too bad because I had been hoping that we could erect a huge flaming chalice that would flicker and all that. Well, what really caught my attention with all of this was the statement by one of the nativity scene supporters who said that it's a sad day for freedom of religion when a small group of people with an ideological axe to grind succeed in censoring the greatest story ever told. And I thought to myself, but this is exactly the point. While the story of the birth of Jesus and of his entire life and death, actually, is a great story, it is only one great story. There are numerous others from other faith traditions throughout the year, and the government can't decide which of these stories is the greatest. That's what's meant by freedom of religion in our Constitution. Now, my mother was a devout Episcopalian. She dragged all 5 of us kids to church every Sunday morning and made us read the gospel and epistle for that Sunday if we stayed home sick. She read us Bible stories when we were young, helped us say our prayers at bedtime, and made sure that each of us got confirmed in the church at the appropriate time. But she never, ever would have suggested that Christianity was the one true faith. While I doubt she knew much about religions other than her own, I never heard her speak ill of someone else's faith, other than perhaps when they used that faith to defend racism, homophobia, or violence. Indeed, I used to joke that my mother had only herself to blame for my becoming a Unitarian Universalist because she was so open to my questions when I was young and so convinced that the main role of religion was to spread kindness and do justice. My mother didn't know a lot about the festivals and stories of other religions, but I think she would have enjoyed knowing more about them. And I suspect she would have really gotten a kick out of the Hindu Festival of Colors, which falls around this time of year. This year it was March 6th. It's marked by people throwing colored powder or liquids at each other. Sounds a little bit like paintball, but probably less messy and doesn't use guns that look lifelike. The festival is apparently especially raucous in India, where colored water is squirted at, innocent passersby, and people are dunked into muddy water. I read that people can get away with anything during Holi by simply saying, "Oh, don't mind, it's Holi." One of the most treasured stories behind this festival is that of Lord Krishna and his future bride, Radha. Long before they married, when they were still quite young, Krishna asked his mother why his skin was so dark and Radha's skin was so light. And his mother jokingly suggested that Krishna smear some colored powder on Radha to make her whatever color he wanted, and he did. Thus the practice of throwing colored powder or water at people. I really hope Radha had a good sense of humor. There is another element to Holi, which my mother would have also liked. It is a time for family members to get together, exchange gifts, eat special foods, and decorate their homes. getting to sound a lot like Christmas. It is considered to be one of the liveliest and most beloved festivals of the Hindu calendar, and the stories behind it, there are quite a few, are pretty great. They remind us that religious wisdom moves us towards the love of family and the joy of life. I imagine my mother would have appreciated the stories about Siddhartha Gautama, the prince born in Nepal in the 6th century BCE, who later became known as the Buddha. The young Siddhartha's mother died just 7 days after he was born. Legend has it that soon after his birth, some holy men announced that he would one day become either a political leader and unify India or a great religious leader. Now, this upset his father, the king, who had wanted his son to follow in his footsteps, living a life of luxury and power. So he forbid Siddhartha to ever go outside the palace gardens, and for fear that he would see all the suffering in the world and want to do something to fix it, like become a political or religious leader. And so instead, the king found a bride for the young man by age 17, and soon after they married, she became pregnant with their son. But that didn't satisfy Siddhartha. He was restless to see what lay beyond the palace, and finally convinced his father to let him go out. Once out on the streets of Nepal, despite his father's order that anyone old or disabled or poor had to be put out of sight, the young man did see people who were greatly suffering, and he was never able to get these images out of his mind. On his 29th birthday, Siddhartha left home, renouncing his royal life, exchanging his rich clothes for simple cloth, and becoming, instead of a prince, a wandering monk, seeking to find the cause of suffering and how to alleviate it. One day, as you probably know, he settled himself beneath a Bodhi tree, vowing to himself that he would not move from there until he discovered the answers to his questions. And, according to some Buddhists, on the night of the full moon in the month of May, complete enlightenment came to him, bringing him a sense of deep peace and understanding of the true nature of all living beings, and an acceptance of the natural cycle of life and death. From then on, he became known as the Buddha, the awakened one. Surely this is one of the greatest stories ever told, reminding us of the wisdom of mindfulness that leads us to deeper understanding and compassion. Now, there are two major festivals celebrated by Buddhists. In May is the most important one, Wesak, or Buddha Day, marking both the Buddha's birth and his enlightenment, and December 8th, Bodhi Day, which is celebrated by some other Buddhists as the day he found enlightenment. Likewise, the stories of the birth of Muhammad in the year 750 of the Common Era are also pretty great and actually share some similarities with the stories around the birth of Jesus, which I'm sure my mother would have found intriguing. Such as the story that tells us when the prophet's birth was near, Allah ordered the angels to open all the heavens and the doors of the sky, reminiscent of the angels singing on high the night of Jesus' birth. There is even mention of a special star hovering in the sky the night Muhammad was born. In addition, at the birth of the Muslim prophet, the mountains stood high with pride, the seas became wild, the sun shined brighter, and the devil was hung upside down in 70 chains. And more importantly, following a long drought, on the day he was born, rain fell, The land turned green, and healthy crops were everywhere. Sounds like a pretty good story to me, one that we could use today. We could use his birth today. Many Muslims celebrate the commemoration of Muhammad's birth with street parades, and by decorating their homes and mosques, they donate food and other goods to charities or listen to their children recite poems about the Prophet's life. My mother would have liked that. She would have appreciated acknowledging the wisdom of children and the dedication to giving to the poor. Now, on April 5th, we will be reflecting on the stories of Passover and Easter. But there is another story important in Judaism that is one of my favorites. It is the spring festival of Purim, wherein the beautiful Queen Esther plots to save her people from the wicked Haman. It takes place in ancient Persia, where the king has chosen Esther as his wife, not knowing that she is Jewish. At the same time, the king's aide, Haman, becomes furious when Esther's uncle Mordecai refuses to bow down to him. So Haman orders all of the Jews to be killed. Mordecai learns of this and convinces Esther to tell the king that she is Jewish, and also of Haman's plans to kill her people. It was an incredibly courageous action for Esther to take. When the king learns of Haman's plans, he becomes outraged and orders that Haman be hanged on the very gallows that Haman had built to use on Mordecai. It is a story not only about the triumph of love and courage over evil, but also of trickery, of things suddenly being turned upside down. So on Purim, people dress in outlandish costumes and carry noisemakers so that whenever they hear Haman's name, they can drown it out. It is by far one of the greatest and most fun stories and celebrations of all, reminding us of the courage it takes to realize freedom and that things are not always as they seem. The story of the birth, life, and death of Jesus is definitely a wonderful story, rich with wisdom and inspiration for us all. But it is not the only story that can carry meaning for us, nor is it the greatest. True, it is the story that most of us know and celebrate at Christmas and in a few weeks at Easter, and I always look forward to both. But I don't want my country or my state or my city council celebrating it for me with my tax money, and I bet most of you don't either. And we don't because as Unitarian Universalists, we embrace the wisdom found in all religions, which is why you have hanging on the walls of your other building at least 2 framed paintings depicting the symbols of over 24 different faith traditions around the world. As Unitarian Universalists, we honor the sacred traditions and rituals of all faiths. That's why in a few weeks we will be celebrating during our worship services the spring holy days of both Passover and Easter. And as Unitarian Universalists, we celebrate the many religious stories, including those of our own faith, told throughout the year. We know that all of them are truly some of the greatest stories ever told. May we share this faith, our good news of religious freedom and understanding, to all who might be feeling that there is no place for them. Here, may they truly know that whoever they are, wanderer or worshiper, they are welcome here. Amen, and blessed be. And now, as I extinguish the chalice, I invite you to read the words found in your order of service. we extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
We are the Caneo Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Our mission is to nurture spiritually courageous people who transform the world through justice and compassion. Like us on Facebook, check out our website at CVUUF.org, or come visit us. See you soon!